We're going to tackle today is a question I got from a professional coach, gaming coach. And this guy works in League of Legends. And he says one of the most prevalent topics is the optimized age for professional players. What age of players that professional organizations should be interested in. So that is what age is good for good play and when they start recruiting. This is things he thinks about a lot. And whether or not it's even true that players at 25 or older are less valuable than the classic 17 and 19-year-old range, especially considering the lack of physical training in esports compared to physical sports. So I think what he means is that typically physical peaks are considered to happen around 25. And there's clearly clearly that's not straightforward, because while on sort of simple, straightforward like strength tests or things like that, we can see people are peaking, like what's it called? The NFL combine, the jump, the sprints, all the sort of full body abilities. They peak at 25, roughly, but we know that a lot of athletes, particularly the one I like to use, like mixed martial arts, in the heavyweight division, the best fighters in the world are in their late 30s. So there's something about that's not just the raw physical peaking, and even those sports. There's something about their brain, their experience. Perhaps it's the complexity of mixed martial arts, and their experience plays into their benefit. So this is the question we'll be tackling. We'll spend about, I don't know, 10 minutes, maybe less. Hopefully just give you an interesting answer and a whirlwind of stuff that maybe you haven't heard. And then we're just going to move on. So he continues his question. As a neuroscientist, he means me, not him. Can I weigh in on this topic? What age of player would be optimal for a professional player? And how long would it make sense for their career to last cognitively in terms of keeping it at the highest level of play? So yeah, these are very huge questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them in totality, but what I can tell you is some of the stuff I talked to him about, and him and other people found useful. So I like to tell this story, and well, let me. Okay, I thought I had an interlude, but whatever. The story is, I went to grad school, and I was kind of interested in this stuff. Actually, I used to, even in residency, I used to, on my days off, I would, to kind of zone out, watch other people play video games, commentaries of them. And at the time, StarCraft 1 scene was happening, because this is like 10 years ago. And I remember I used to observe how brutally those players would drop off in their 20s. And and I remember when I went to grad school, some people made the excuse that, or when I bring this up, the music's kind of loud in my head. I don't know why it's so loud. It's so weird. It's not showing up at OBS, but it's blasting in my ears here. Let me downshift here. All right. So yeah. So what a lot of scientists say when I would bring this up, like these players, my anecdotal observing of videos on YouTube and stuff, whenever I get a chance to watch this stuff, was that people drop off like right in their early 20s, like 22, 24, 25. They were already ancient. And I think a lot of esports people have the similar impression. even though I was never in esports or anything like that. But I used to observe this. I used to ask them, and I was like, you know, we're brain scientists. Can't we get some scans or have a good answer for this? And they all said it's because most people get careers at that point, so they're not interested in games anymore. And I was like, you guys don't understand this at all. Like some of these people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like the professional player scene, they're not dropping off out of choice. They're not. It's not like there's an age limit or that they're looking to end that career and start a more traditional career. It was such a weird nonsensical answer, and I got this from the professors who are older, like in their 40s at the time, the postdocs who are in their 30s, and yeah, even for some of the game designers I worked with, who were in their like late 20s, 30s, they were kind of like, well, yeah, you have to get a job, man. And it doesn't make any sense to me because it's like if you're especially these players that are doing well financially already. Anyway, that was the big answer I always got, is that people sort of grow up in their 20s, and that's why they get worse suddenly, or they can't play these games. They don't have enough time, and it seemed like such a misunderstanding of how dedicated and professional the esports scene is. So I initially wanted to like pay the top StarCraft at the time. I thought was a pretty cool complex cognitive task. I don't really play it that often. I played it a little bit in college, and mostly with my friends at a really bad level, but it was fun. You know, I didn't really keep up on it through med school or anything like that. And then mostly I was playing mods, like Warcraft mods and StarCraft mods. Anyway, this is turning into a story segment, which I made a little bam. Yeah, that's right. I'm evolving chat. That's right. It's story time. I should have put this in the beginning, but I didn't. Anyway, I don't know how long this is gonna stay as a story, but whatever. Uh, yeah. So again, I played a lot of mods for fun, kind of zoning out at night after school or whenever I could during med school. But yeah, but I watched the professional scene to some extent. It was kind of fun. I mean, it's fun to watch high level people do things really well. It's really hard for most people to do, and that's what StarCraft is. It's a really complex cognitive task, which is why I thought it'd be cool to bring in professional players and scan them. Nobody wanted to do this in the department. Nobody wanted to pay for this. Nobody wanted to do this. I think there's been some like labs in South Korea that have done this in the meantime. I remember actually being a peer review on one of these papers, but it wasn't done very well. But I thought it was cool that they were trying. Um, I don't remember where the paper was from. I think the paper I peer reviewed was from Europe, and I remember the other peer reviewers were really harsh on it because it's hard to take something as complex as a game or any sort of real world task and get clean data on it, which is why we have these really horrible, boring tasks in lab, and then there's a huge gap. So with those tests, we can get cleaner data, but how relevant is that data? And then as you go to things people do in the real world, like I don't know, writing an email or whatever it is, it's harder to get it's harder to make that into an objective assessment that's going to be consistent across people, or playing a video game that's very complex. Anyway, but I thought it would be cool because I'm sure their brains have been changed. So if we could find like 20, 25, 30 of the top StarCraft players in the world, I thought it'd be cool just to bring them in and do the traditional cognitive tasks and see how different their brain is. I'm sure they perform way higher, but to see if there's anything even suggestive in sort of the way the brain lights up in that really basic, almost pre-science level. There's not really any great hypotheses or anything like that. It's just you're just curious. It's sort of the first wave of observation data. But yeah, they weren't into that. So anyway, the point is, long story short, I'm gonna probably talk about this another time, but I ended up creating a custom game in grad school, and we collected data on that, and we were able to collect data on the scanner and an EG, and then just behaviorally. We collected a lot more data just behaviorally. Behaviorally means all you do is we're just collecting like your reaction time data. And there's no EEG or fMRI data collection, so we could do a lot more. So we did maybe 200 people on that, and we did all age ranges. And the short of it was that with multitasking, which I thought was, it's a more complex cognitive skill than a lot of cognitive skills that they measure, like selective attention or whatever. It's a little more complex than most cognitive tests, and we had pretty reliable data that showed that it people peaked at exactly. They said the second decade of life, when they're in their 20s, or rather the third decade of life. But exactly, if you really pinpoint, it's like 24 years old. It's like 23 point something, like rounded up 24 years old. That's when people seem to peak in multitasking. So I kind of use that as an example, and and then the caveat to that, if you're a player and you're 24 now or something, or you're 25, is that there's individual variation, and that like this coach, he deals with League of Legends. That might be more complex than even a multitasking skill set. I assume it is. I would bet lots of money it is. So the more complex a game is, I think the better the longevity is for the sport. And what I mean by that is, because reaction time peaks like in your late teens, and multitasking peaks, which is a more complex skill set, peaks in your early 20s. But then there's the most complex skill sets, like language or recognizing emotion in people's faces. Those things peak when you're 50 or even older. So there's certain things that your brain continues to get better at, and with League of Legends in particular, there's even another layer to this, because there's a bunch of social cohesion and coordination, because you're on a team with four other people. And so that, I think that even adds more longevity to it. I mean, this is the reason why a lot of like the military commanders and some of the greatest military leaders in history were older, because I think these things continue to peak. I don't think it's just like the inertia of promotion systems in human society, or whatever, or people, older people trying to keep younger people down. I mean, there's an aspect of that, but I think to some extent it's because you can actually continue to get better and better. So that was one big point I like to make, and I made to this coach. And it's funny, because by comparison, like StarCraft is actually not as complex, I think. It's perceived as strategically complex by a lot of spectators, including me early on. But the more you look into it, the more you realize it's just this brutal cognitive task. And there's of course a lot of complex decision making and stuff like that in it. But like the DeepMind AI project, where they were trying to build an AI system that would beat players, it became increasingly apparent that the way to win, to some extent, is to get the other player to screw up somewhere. It's not so much that you're making like brilliant moves against them, like chess moves. It's more that there's juggling seven balls, and you're trying to chuck an eighth ball or a ninth ball and see if they can keep all the balls up in the air, or do they just let one or two of them fall, or do they just screw it all up and let a bunch of them fall? It's more of like a cognitive stress test. It's very brutal and constant. And so it still makes it very cool to watch. And for them to handle that and then have a layer of sort of decision making on top of it, it's very cool. But the meat of it, the tamale of that game, is really still sort of a cognitive, kind of a brutal multitasking cognitive activity or task, if you will. Yeah. So I don't know. And I'm trying to think of any other interesting things to say on this, without rabbit trailing into other things too hard. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that was a question I got from a coach, and they were just curious about the neuroscience of it and how yeah, how people what is the information out there. They were more interested too, like how they should be recruiting and stuff like that. Um, I think there's a lot of already in place system this stuff, where uh, to some extent you're always going to have a little better time with teenagers in college level because of the availability and for them to try and then fail and then move on and do something else with their life. And it gets harder as you get older. So that there's like social reasons to drive these age things too, but it's very clear from the cognitive neuroscience literature that late teenagers have the best sort of reaction times, and then more complex skill sets like which like multitasking is just your reaction times now. How fast are you when you have to do multiple things at once? And that peaks a little later. And as you kind of layer these skills up more and more, the age range can peak later. The complexity of tasks go up all the way to like language. It can, and in fact, even like math skill can keep increasing until you're older. People who take these cognitive algebra tests will statistically, as a population, get better and better as they get older. Um, and it's interesting because like while multitasking of 24-year-olds is probably the peak, if you just look at their reaction time on individual tasks, they're probably going to perform less well than younger people. So they're already losing the more primitive levels. Like they're not as good. I mean, they're still great, but they're not as good. And but then the next, so that's kind of one pattern you see in this stuff. And yeah, and I'm sure it's this stuff is brutal. Like in professional sports, like physical sports too, where I know if you're like a running back in the NFL, the amount of punishment you take on your spine and back, everything, because you have to run through all these large 250, 300-pound linebackers versus like quarterbacks can have good longevity. Famously, Tom Brady and Brett Favre and stuff like that try to hang in there till they're 40 because they're protected by a bunch of guys, and they just have to throw the ball and not use their body as a battering ram. Although I know they get sacked a lot and stuff, and it's still a brutal sport for them too. But yeah, the physicality of a lot of sports, make people drop off, and they can't do it their whole lives. So likewise, there's sort of a competitive brutality to esports, and it is driven by changes in your brain. And it's interesting because even going from when you're born to 1 years old, there's a ton of neural pruning. Your ability to absorb languages isn't as good when you're 6 as when you're 1. So the ability to absorb things or do I guess it's hard to say this in a brief, clear way, but um, I sort of some of your potential goes down immediately and continues to go down, but that is it doesn't capture your potential value in complex situations. And like I said, like famously, like a lot of military commanders are at least in their 30s or older, and that's just because and this has been true for thousands of years of recorded history. So you do continue to get better at certain things. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, I'm gonna see. I'm gonna quickly look up see if there's any other good coach questions because I'm not sure how long that segment was. Just really fast. Oh yeah, I got another PM from a high school athletic coach. I'm just searching coach and seeing the questions. Um, and he said he played professional Call of Duty for over 10 years. And oh yeah, so he's responding to we had a there was a kind of an ongoing debate in Reddit about the benefits of Call of Duty with kids, and there's a lot of just I think moms complaining about their kids playing Call of Duty and dealing with like angry sons usually, and I think there's a lot to that thing. Some of these moms were like, can I just get them to play different games, or they get angry, and I think it's a deeper issue than that. I think they just have to have more things going on in their life. They probably just don't have very many options, and I can kind of relate as a former younger semi-angry male. But so I don't think switching in and out some like maybe lesser intense game. I do think that if you are getting less enjoyment out of your games, you might really consider that you've just formed a habit at this point and it's not really enjoyable anymore. Like, I think novelty is a huge source of enjoyment and learning. And on the thousandth hour of a game, are you really learning as much? Are you still challenging yourself, or are you just kind of going through the motions because you've formed this like neural circuit? You form the habit because all the reward is front loaded at the beginning, and then it helps establish a habit. And this is good for like brushing your teeth or something. So you brush your teeth your whole life, but a lot of things, if you're just trying to revisit it and trying to extract the enjoyment you once had, and it's not really working, you should try to be mindful of it. It doesn't mean you have to stop playing games. Try to find a new game. Try to find a new genre of game, especially because there's going to be a lot of novelty in that. Try to change the way you play it. Maybe find better social group to play it with, or I don't know. Get into different kinds of games. But anyway, so this coach was responding to talking about angry kids, and he said he played professional Call of Duty, and he was making the point, which I like this point. I've made this point as well, that a lot of kids can get pretty angry at that age if they're competitive, and I like to make that point too when people talk about game rage and anger. It's like it's not necessarily a bad thing because it means temperamentally you're ambitious, you're say passionate, and those things are good temperamentally over life versus somebody who's very passive and can't really get excited about anything. And maybe you can't, you're not, maybe you have like anhedonia now. You don't have really excitement or enjoyment about anything now, but you used to. Well, that's good. I mean, you're capable of it then, and you just have to find new things. But my point is, when people are like, I get angry, or my son or whatever gets angry, it's not necessarily bad because that's probably a good trait for life. Not getting angry, but you know, feeling things deeply emotionally and being competitive. And so the coach is basically saying that he had the same thing, and he still thinks video games is a good way to relieve stress at that age. And many kids let loose in competitive games, which is I think true. Um, yeah, because competitive nature is what sets many people apart from their peers, allowing them to succeed, become better every day in school, later in life as functioning members of society. And that's kind of yeah, I agree with that. And I actually have this problem now, even with not games. I'll take some like fun hobby, something that I enjoy, and then I'll just slowly over time turn it into something I hate because I get competitive about it, you know, and then and really being kind of pissed off or angry and being competitive are the same, are two sides of the same coin. So if you, just as long as you're aware of it and you're mindful of it, and you take that as a signal that maybe there's other things in your life that you could be working on that are not going well, which is why you're overreacting to what is just a game. So anyway, yeah, that's my little Q&A segment for today. I'm not gonna do hours of it like I have been since I started streaming. We'll just do that at the beginning. I'll continue to respond to PMs or chat or whatever.